In this video, we are going to see about JavaScript event listeners. So you remember earlier I said that yeah, something like this thing is not when this thing was mentioned here inside the head, then something like document.query selector was not working if I write some code here, right? And that was because while this is being executed, the DOM has not loaded till now. What if we created a event listener such that in the callback of that listener we say that call my function when something has happened? Okay, so event listener means if some event has happened, inform me, intimate me about it, right? And then I will do some action. So we'll see that example later, but right now we'll see some more simpler example which a similar thing we might have earlier discussed also. So for example, let's have a simple button, okay, and that button has, let's say, click me, okay, and when I click on this button, then I can define my on click. This is also this is actually event handler, okay. So event listener and event handler, there is a slight difference. So event listener is basically, so you can understand that basically these event handlers are directly given to the HTML element itself. So here only I am saying that some my function, okay, and this function now you can define in anywhere and in anywhere JavaScript. So for example, here you have some script tag, here you can create a function, and whatever you want to do here you can do. Let's say you are printing hello, okay. So and here the syntax is, so this is confusing. Here the syntax is you have to call it like this, but remember that this is the only exception. This is the only exception. When in event handlers, when you pass, then you, or in JavaScript for that matter, this is not JavaScript, you understand, this is not JavaScript, this is simply string. This, in fact, this highlighting of a string is highlighting of this thing is also just because of the VS Code. Otherwise you can simply think that this is plain and simple string. You see, simply string, okay. So yeah, but then you understand that whenever we pass functions like callback function, set timeout, anywhere, we never call it, we simply pass the reference handler, right? But this is like just some slightly different syntax in HTML. So when we write a click handler or event handler in HTML, then we do something like this. I believe we have seen this earlier also. So once this is done, then you can see that, yeah, so now when I click this, then this hello is happening, right? And for that matter, you can have this code here also, you can have this code here also, both is fine, okay. So as you can see that is also working, which means that both are fine. Okay, fine. So we have seen that a simple click handle, right? But what we can do is that this thing can have some ID, So let's say its ID is equal to let's say btn buttons for that matter, okay. Then we know that we can access these elements from so we will use this later, so comment this for now. But we know that these things can be accessed via DOM, right? So let's say const btn whatever button is equal to document dot query selector, and what is the ID? ID is btn. So we say that we have got that button, right? Now rather than writing directly whatever the function and that was, you understood, that was like sort of a stringified way. That is not a native JavaScript way, right? The native JavaScript way will be that now I have a handler, I have a reference to this button DOM element, right? Now I can programmatically add that click function, right? And I can do that by doing something like this. I have the handler btn, and this variable can be anything. This is different, right? Btn dot add event listener. So this is the thing, right? And after that, you can say that on click, what do I want to do? Okay, what do I want to do? And let's say I want to console log. That is fine. So instead defining this function, and again, if you wanted, you could have done something like this also, right? So yeah, so this function, and just remember that here you are not calling, here you're just passing the function. This is just a variable which is a function, right? Simple. And you can see that this thing works, right? So so this is where we, so there whatever was there mentioned like on click, here it is simply click. So button dot at event listener, which event you are listening to? You are listening to click event. So whenever somebody clicks on this button, then you are listening to this thing is saying that once you set this function, then I am listening to this click event. Where? Not everywhere, only on this button. And whenever I see a click, I call this function. And that's why you can see that whenever I click, this function is called. Whenever I click, this function is called. Okay. But yeah, but too much of printing on console. Let's do something interactive so that I click something and something in this web page only occurs rather than on console. Okay. So for that, what we can do is that, let's say let's say we have a span element, and here some 2015, some year, and its id is equal to, let's say, year is there. Okay. Now this year I will target from here. Okay. So for simplicity, let's write anonymous function here only rather than creating a new function. And here I am getting some element which is like document dot query selector, and that is id year. Okay. And you can see that element dot okay. So yeah, so this thing this thing. Okay, let's see. So this thing, you can see that when I clicked, then I got the this what is this hash year id year. So this span element I got, and its inner text I'm printing, right? So this is 2015, that is fine. But rather than printing, let's set this. But this thing is a string, right? This thing is a string. I want to so something like this. This is a string. I want to firstly convert this string to a number firstly, and then add one, let's say. Which means that, let's say, when I click, then year is increasing, let's say. So next year 2015 should become 16 and like that. So but that is text, right? So in order to convert text to number, if you know that text is like number like, then you can simply use plus. That is one syntax, right? There is another syntax also, which is like the more standard or formal way of doing this. This is plus is just a trick. The formal way is that there is a class called number, and you can use number dot parse end. And in this, if you pass a string, then it is converted to a number which is integer. There is parse float also if you have decimal numbers, but if you know that this is an integer, then that string is converted to integer. This whole thing is now an integer, and you add 1 to it, and then you assign back to that thing, right? Which means that now if you see, and what are you going to do? This whole thing is becoming 2015 is becoming now should become 16, right? So let's see this. So you see that 2015 is becoming 16, 17, 18. So you can understand that as you are clicking, this thing is increasing, right? So this is this is another example where you can see that now we are able to achieve interactivity in our web page using JavaScript and our skills which we have learned in JavaScript, and we are complementing that with DOM APIs to communicate with the web page. Okay. First of all these things which we are doing generally, like yeah, so there are, like in React, there are better ways to handle this, but for that matter right now we are seeing this how we can do that by directly DOM manipulation. Okay, yeah, so this is fine. One final thing is that let's take an example of that thing which we discussed, that if this thing is not here, if this thing is here, then what is happening is that this whole thing will it work? You see that even in loading it is giving error. Because why it is error? Because this element is basically null, and null dot inner text you are doing something, right? If you see this ELEM, then you can see that leave ELEM. In fact, this thing BTN is itself null, right? There is no DOM at all, right? So you can see that this thing is null. So yeah, so the point is that this thing is creating trouble, right? Somehow I have to call this whole piece of code, right? But I have to call this once the page has loaded. Is there something I can do that I can call some function, something like dot event listener, right, and there like some event and some callback function. Inside that callback function we will write this whole thing. Okay, turns out that there is such a event, and that event is called load. But the thing is that that load event is generally not used on document object, but a parent of document object which is called window. So I lied when I said that document is actually the root object of all. The document is root object of only the document, but in the browser there is something above the document also, which is window. So you see that if this tab, this whole tab is there, that is window. Inside that, this part is document, right? But the loading and unloading part and this thing is like on that slightly higher level. This document concerns with only DOM and the view, the data part which is visible in this web page, right? But we are now talking about whether this whole window is loaded or not, right? So just for that matter, actually that I am mentioning here because this document dot add event listener is also there, but the event load which we are talking about, that does not exist, that will not work across all the browsers consistently, but that will work across consistently if you use window dot add event listener, right? Window dot add event listener has a method, has a event called load. So basically what is happening is that it is simply a way of saying that when the window has loaded, then call my this function, and once I have that, then what to do. And just to prove that, you can see that let's say some thing is there, right? And you see that, yeah, immediately it is printed, but it is fast, like page is loaded and then immediately it is printed. But actually this hello is printed after this load page has loaded, right? And we can prove that by now copy pasting this to here. And now we'll see that we are not getting error, rather we are getting proper button element, which means that this thing is triggering after this whole document has loaded, and now we have btn and this p, everything is there. And that's why if we are doing something like query selector btn, then it is like not giving error, it is giving proper button, which means that the document has loaded, right? So this is also another example of event listeners, okay, where we are listening to the load event. Some events might happen more than once. For example, you click many times, every time you click, then that event is triggered, right? But these load event listener will be triggered just once the page is loaded, that will be triggered once, right? But coming back to that thing, now this whole thing should work, right? Because I have a button, and on that button again I did dot click. So when the page has loaded, I called this piece of code, where in that piece of code I take the button element and I add, when the first time this page is loaded, then I added click event listener to my button element. And what is that click event listener? That it takes the year and increases it by 1. So if everything works fine, then you see that it is working as expected, which we achieved earlier, okay? Yeah, so this is an example where and there are many more examples, but now you understand the concept, that how you can use event listeners, because these sort of things will be very much common going forward in React and all. So yeah, so that will be all for this video. See you in the next one.